guys, and today I will be reading the book, drumroll please, The Land of Stories, Worlds Collide. It is a very fun series. I'm on book 6. I was going to read it, but I felt like sharing it with you. Sorry about that. My mom is inky. But yeah. Thought I'd share it with you. So we got this fun little fun little picture there. Okay, let's start. The Land of Stories, Worlds Collide. Land of Stories, Worlds Collide. A birthday celebration. Prologue. Bookworm Paradise had never been so crowded. Over 1,000 guests were crammed inside the bookstore's event space until there was no more open chairs, no standing room left. A small stage was flooded with light and set with 2 chairs and 2 microphones for the evening's program. It was difficult to see over the row of journalists and photographers crouched in the front of the stage. But the attendees were assured the press would only be there for the first few minutes of the event. The Magnetulan crowd had come to the bookstore to see their favorite author in the flesh. The guests fidgeted as they stood and squirmed in their seats as they anxiously waited for him to make his first public appearance in years. Not only were they celebrate the writer's 5 decades-long career, but the event that also making a very special day in the author's life. A colorful banner painted by students from the local elementary school hung above the stage that said, "Happy 80th birthday, Mr. Bailey." Just as the bookstore promised at 8 o'clock sharp, a man in a check suit stepped on stage and the evening's festa began. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Bookworm Paradise," the man said into the microphone. I'm Georgia Quinn from the New York Times Book Review, and I couldn't be more honored to be moderating tonight's events. We are all here to celebrate a man who has made the world a much more magical place. Thanks to over 100 published works for children's fiction, the crowd cheered at the mention of Mr. Bailey's accomplished career. All the author's books could be found in the audience as the guests held their favorite titles close to their hearts. As I look around the room, I am very pleased to see a diverse group of people, Mr. Quinn continued. Mr. Bailey has always said his great accomplishment isn't the number of books he's written or the number of copies he's sold, but the rich diversity of his readership. I can't think of a better testament to his work than knowing it's enjoyed by families all over the world. Many people in the audience had a hand over their chest as they remembered the joy of the author and brought them over the years. Some of them became teary-eyed, recalling that an impact Mr. Bailey's stories and had on their young lives. Luckily, they found his work when they made a good story the most. It's hard to find someone who doesn't smile at the mention of his name, Mr. Quinn went on. Mr. Bailey filled our childhoods with adventure and suspension. His characters taught us the difference between right and wrong. His stories showed us that the imagination is most powerful weapon in the world. You know, it is special when the whole world considers them family. So now let's remind him just how special it is. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please give a warm welcome to one and only Connor Bailey, Jonathan Bailey. The seated guests leaped to their feet and the event space filled with thousands of applause. The photographers raised their cameras and covered the stage in quickly pulsating flashes. An adorable and skinny old man slowly made his way onto stage and waved at the excited crowd. He had big eyes and color of the sky and messy white hair that sat on his head with a fluffy cloud. He wore thick glasses, bright red suspenders, and a neon red sneaker. From the way he dressed and the mischievous twinkle in his eye, it was clear Mr. Bailey was just as colorful as the characters in this book. Mr. Quinn tried to help the author into his seat, but the old man waved the attempt off, insisting he didn't need assistance. Even after Mr. Bailey sat down, the crowd continued to shower him with their affectionate applause. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Mr. Bailey said into the microphone. "You're too kind, but it's probably best you stop clapping so I can get on with the show. I'm 80 years old. This time is off the essence." The crowd laughed and took their seats, each sitting a little more on the edge than before. "We can't thank you enough for joining us, Mr. Bailey," said Mr. Quinn again. "I'm delighted to have the opportunity," the author said, "and thank you, Mr. Quinn, for such a lovely introduction. I didn't realize you were talking about me until I heard my full name." After all these compliments, I was afraid the store had booked the wrong Mr. Bailey. "The praise was all for you, sir," the moderator assured him. "First things first, happy birthday. It's a privilege to celebrate the milestones with you. You've got to dig deep to find dirt older than me," said Mr. Bailey joked. "It's funny when I was young, there was nothing I looked forward to more than my birthday. Nowadays, with every year passing, I feel more and more like an expired can of beans that God forgot to toss out." "I don't believe that for a second," Mr. Quinn said. "Every time I hear your name mentioned, it's always followed with a comment about your impressive stamina. Do you have any secrets for staying in shape, or how you keep your energy up? As you get older, it's important to select the shape you most identify with. As you can see, I've questioned a squash," Mr. Bailey teased. "When it comes to maintaining good energy level, I simply make the most out of the 4 hours a day I'm awake." A cheeky grin spread across the author's face, and the audience roared with laughter. They were pleased to hear him speak with the same trademark wit he rode with. "We also enjoy tonight by Mr. Bailey's family," Mr. Quinn said, and gestured to the people sitting in the front row. "Thank you for sharing your father and grandfather with us, Mr. Bailey. Would you like to introduce your children and grandchildren?" "I'd be happy to. That's my older daughter, Elizabeth, her husband, Ben, and their daughter, Charlie. Next, we have my son, Matthew, his husband, Harry, and their boys, Adam, Grayson. Last but not certainly least, my daughter, Carrie, her husband, Scott, and their children, Brighton, Sammy, and Levi. As you see, they're all adopted, a bunch that good-looking couldn't possibly share my DNA." The audience chuckled and gave the author family a warm round of applause, forcing them to stand and wave bashfully. "We were very saddened to hear your wife's passing earlier this year," Dr. Quinn said. "Most of our audience knows Mr. Bailey's wife, Benyon Campbell Bailey. Brienne Campbell Bailey was also an accomplished writer and served as a United States Senator for 24 years until her retirement. Would you believe we were middle school sweethearts?" Mr. Bailey said with a smile. "As far as I'm concerned, I was the first and the only mistake she ever made." How long have you were married? Mr. Quinn asked. 52 years, Mr. Bailey said. She insisted on finishing her master's degree before marriage and published her 5th book before starting a family. I'm not surprised, Mr. Quinn said. The late senator was a mayor active for women's rights. Yes, but I was most classified. Bree was never late for anything, the author said with a smile. She did absolutely nothing, everything on her own time. Her death was no exception. But in family, we don't say die or pass away. We say returning to magic. It suits her much better. Before she returned to magic, my wife hid thousands of notes in our home for me to find after she was gone. Not a day goes by and I don't discover a sticky note reminding me to take a medicine or eat breakfast. Magic indeed, Mr. Quinn said. You were both born and raised in Willow Crest, California. Is that right? That's right, Mr. Bailey said with a nod. And what a different world it is. Paper comes from trees, cars run on gas, caffeine was illegal. It was practically the Dark Ages. Can you remember the first person who inspired you to write? The moderator asked. I was in 6th grade teacher. It was my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Peters, the author said. At first, we didn't see eye to eye. She thought her classroom was a place for education. I thought it was a great place for naps. A year later, she became principal of middle school. Read some short stories I had written for my English class. Miss Peters saw a potential in my writing and planted the seeds in my head. I've always been so grateful to her. I dedicated one of my books to her, but I can't recall which one. It's a Fairytopia for the Little Tree Journey, shouted an excited little girl in the background. Oh yes, that one, Mr. Bailey said, and scratched his head. You'll have to be patient with me. My memory has been on vacation since my early 70s. These days, I'll pick up a book and read the whole thing without realizing I wrote it. Speaking of which, let's talk about your remarkable writing career, Mr. Quinn said. As I said before, you published more than 100 books over the course of 5 decades. Along with those are the Starboardia Sagas, The Adventure of a Blimp Boy, Mysteries, The Galaxy Queen's Corruptions, The Ziplings graphic novels, and most notably, the Fairytopia series. The crowd cheered the loudest at the mention of Mr. Bailey's fantasy series, Fairytopia. The author's 6 books fantasized was the most successful, acclaimed public for his career. The series has been translated into 50 languages, was sold in over 100 countries, and had helped improve children's literacy around the world. The Fairytopia Tales books had also been adapted into several major motion pictures, a dozen televisions, countless items of tacky merchandise. Although the mandatory of your work has been best-selling critical hits, you must know you're writing Fairytopia. Mr. Quinn said, what is the special ingredient that makes this series so beloved? That's an easy error. I was written by a child, Mr. Bailey confessed. Not many people know this, but I finished the first draft of Fairytopia, The Wishing Charm, when I was about 13 years old. I was very embarrassed about writing it, so I kept it a secret. I didn't even show it to my family. Later in the 20s, after a few mild literacy successes, I came across a dusty old manuscript in my mother's attic. I brushed it off, fixed some typos, and had it published. I known that what a hit it would be, I would have pursued it sooner. How interesting, Mr. Quinn said. So you're saying the series is successful with children because it's conserved by one? Precisely, Mr. Bailey said. Children will always be drawn to the stories written in their own language. And as children's author, it's our job to never to listen touch with the language. You've had plenty of opportunities to write for adults, but you always stayed in that realm of middle grade. Why do you enjoy writing for children? I suppose I just like the children more than I like adults, the author said, with a shameful shrug. No matter how much the world evolves, the children of the world will never change. Every child is born with the same need for love, respect, and understanding. They unaffied it by the same tears, comprehension, conversion, were tormented by an endless curiosity, a fist for knowledge, and a desire for adventure. The greatest tragedy in my life is how some children get robbed in these qualities. We could accomplish great things if we held on to such a fresh point of view. Think about how wonderful this world could be if we all saw it through the eyes of a child. What would your advice be for aspiring authors? Mr. Quinn asked. It was a very important question to the author, and we went silent for a moment. While we thought of the worthy answers, always let the world inspire and influence you, but never let it discourage you. In fact, the more the world discourages you, the more it needs you. As writers, you have a profound privilege and responsibility to create a new world from when the current one takes turn for the worse. Storytelling are more than just entertainers, the shepherds of ideology, the street pavers of progress, the scientists of the soul. If it weren't for people like us who imagine a better world and are brave enough to question and stand up to the authorities that suppress them, will we still be living in the dark ages I was born into? It's because so quick the crowd could hear the ticking of the clock. At first the author was afraid he had said something to upset the audience, but once they had a few seconds to process his words, the place erupted into another thunderous laughter. I'm afraid to follow the answer with another question. So why don't you open the question to your audience members? Mr. Quinn proposed. Nearly all the hands in the room shot at once. Mr. Bailey chuckled at sight, tickled by how many people wanted to ask a question of an old geezer like him. Greaser. Let's start with the woman in the brown shirt, Doctor. Mr. Quinn said. The Starboardia series is much darker than most of your work, especially in the history about American slavery. Were you worried that might be too far for a young audience? Not once, Mr. Bailey said. I will never sugarcoat history so that certain people sleep better at night. The more we shed light on the problems in the world, past and present, the easier it will be to fix them. Now let's go to the boy in the front, Doctor. Mr. Quinn said. How many of your characters are based on yourself? All of them, especially the villains, Dr. Bailey said with a wink. Now we'll have to go to the young man in the middle, Mr. Quinn said. What inspires you to write the Fairytopia series? A mischievous twinkle in the author's eye grew so bright it was practically shined like a searchlight. Would you believe me if I told it was all autobiography? He said. The crowd giggled. Mr. Bailey's children collectively sighed at the father's remark. Not this again. However, Mr. Bailey twinkled never faded. He looked around the room as if he were disappointed the aunt was taking the answer as seriously as the others. It's true, he said with conviction. This world is full of magic. If you choose to see it, it's a choice. I can't make for you. The comment inspired a little girl in the third row to stand on her seat and wave her hand energetically in the air. Whatever her question was, she was more desperate to ask than anyone else in them. Yes, the young lady wearing pigtails, Mr. Quinn said. Hello, Mr. Bailey, she said. My name is Annie, and I love your books. I read all 6 Topia's books a dozen times each. I appreciate that more than words could describe. What's your question? Well, it has to do with what you just said about Fairytopia being true, she said. Everyone knows about Fairytopia as a pair of twins who travel into the fairy tale world, but I bet a lot of people don't know you're twin yourself. I looked up online and saw you had a sister named Alex. So I'm assuming you based Alec and Connie Baxter from Fairytopia on you and your sister. The question took Bailey off guard. His readers were usually so investigated in the worlds he wrote, thought they rarely asked him questions about his personal life, especially ones about his family. That is both creepy and correct, Anna, said Mr. Bailey. I said you have to what it takes to be a private investigator, son. That's not my question. The girl said, according to my research, Alex Bailey attended school in Willowcrest until the 6th grade, but then she vanished from all public records. I looked everywhere, but we couldn't find a single document about where she went or what became of her after that. So I guess my question is less about the books and more about your sister. What happened to Alex? World we knew now, author went dead silent. The twinkle faded from his eye. He shocked not because of the question, but because he remembered the answer. He searched every corner of his patchy memory, but he couldn't recall where his sister was or the last time he had spoken to her. The only memories coming to mind were from when Alex was a teenager. He refused to believe that the last time he had seen her. He was certain he had some communication with Alex since then. She just couldn't just have disappeared as the girl in the pigtails claimed, or could she? Mr. Bailey mumbled as he tried to focus. It's obvious something was wrong, and the crowd began to shift in their seats. When the author realized the audience was growing uncomfortable, he laughed at the reactions like they were only playing a joke on them. It's a simple answer. What happened to Connie at the end of Fairytopia? He phrased the question like he was playing a trivia game with the young girl. But secretly, the author couldn't remember the conclusion of his beloved stories either. Trying to recall whereabouts of his sister made him realize how much information was missing from his memory. She and Alec both had a happy ever after. And he said, did they? The author asked. I mean, of course they did. That's what the answer. But Mr. Bailey, well, this has been a wonderful evening, but I have to cut it short, the author said. I'd love to stay and answer all your questions, but my 4 hours of consciousness are almost up. The author lined his stretch like he was tired, but it wasn't convincing crowd. And the truth, the mental void had terrified him and didn't know how much longer he could keep his fear from surfacing. Mr. Bailey always made jokes about his fading memory, but it wasn't until tonight that he realized it wasn't a laughing matter. Later that evening, once his children had dropped him off at the home and made sure he was settled, Mr. Bailey searched his home for any clues he could find leading to his sister's location. But he found nothing. Not even a photograph. His children already treated him like a toddler. She was afraid to ask one of them what happened to her. For peace of mind, he had to find her on his own. The author could envision every detail of his sister's face, her pale skin, her rosy cheeks, her pale blue eyes, the freckles in the bridge of her nose, and her long strawberry blonde hair were instantly accessible every time he closed his eyes and thought of her. However, this was how Alex had looked in her young. She most certainly would have been an old woman by now. So why couldn't he picture it? "Oh, Alex, where'd you go?" he said to himself. Mr. Bailey knew one thing could jumpstart his memory. He locked himself in a study and searched his bookshelves until he found copies of Fairytopia series, just as he told the audience. The bookstore, all 6 books were based on true events he and his sister had experienced when they were much younger. If they couldn't recall the information or his own, perhaps one of his stories would trigger their memories for him. Mr. Bailey eagerly pulled the first Fairytopia book off the shelf, but remembering the events inspired each book wasn't as easy as he thought it would be. "Think, old man, think," he said. "Fairytopia, the wishing charm, was our first trip to the fairy tale world. We're collecting something. There were things we need to get back home." "Oh, I know, the wishing spell. Our dad's journal helped us navigate to find all the items. We were chased by the big bad wolf pack. Barely survived our encounter with Evil Queen. That's also the years we met Froggy, Red, Jack, and Goldilocks." The old man was so excited to relive those memories that he jumped in the air and his back cracked, reminding him he was too old to do such movement. He put the first book in the series aside and moved on to the sequel, Fairytopia 2, The Evil Fairy's Revenge. He read. What on earth was that about? Wait, that was the year the Enchanters returned. We flew all over the fairytale world in a flying ship called the Granny. Alex defeated the Enchanters by taking her bride. Boy, was she brilliant for doing that. That was the same year we met Mother Goose and Mom married Bob, and the second remembrance gave him a boost of confidence. He eagerly moved to the 3rd book in the Fairytopia 3 series. Fairytopia 3, The Long Lost Army. He read. That must be based on the grand army that tried convincing fairytale world. Conquering the fairytale world. The soldiers were trapped in the portal for over 200 years, thanks to Mother Goose and the Brothers Grimm. Our uncle joined them and found a dragon egg. He raised the beast, and our grandmother slayed it right before she returned to magic. Well, I can't believe our mother let us out of the house after that one. As we moved on to the 4th book and the 5th book, the memories began to flow so freely he had trouble keeping up with them. It was tropical rainstorms and formed in the middle of the terrible drought. Fairytopia 4, The Literature Journey, was when Alex and I chased Uncle Lloyd through the world of classic literature. We would have stopped him sooner if we hadn't separated us into the Camelot and Robin Hood. Fairy Tale 5, A Storyteller's Quest. That was when we traveled to my short shores. We accidentally went inside Bree's writing, and our Uncle Lloyd was trapped in the cemetery of the undead. We rushed back into the hospital. Accident had happened. We arrived. She was gone. The author pulled the 6th and final book in his series off the shelf and stared at the cover. Fairytopia 6, The Great New York Adventure, he read. Unfortunately, the title didn't trigger any memory of the rest of the book had. Mr. Bailey tried as hard as he could to remember what happened, what the book was about, and the events that had inspired him. But he drew a blank at every turn. The answer might have escaped him completely, but he knew that the information he craved for somewhere inside the book. Even if he had misled his readers to a false happy ending, he was certain he would read between the lines and discover the truth. So the beloved children book, Arthur took a deep breath, opened his book to the very first page, and began reading, hoping that with all his heart that the story would remind him where his sister had gone all those years ago. That is just a prologue, and we will end it there. And we will read the next chapter the next time at 5 likes on this video, and I will read the next chapter. And then 50 likes to read the whole series, and then just 20 likes to read one of the series books. And yeah, see you guys next time when I either read the next book when I get to 10 likes or one of the other books. Probably gonna finish this one first. But toodles, bye!